大家好，欢迎来到我频道，很高兴你能来参观我的 YouTube. As you can see today, I am not alone in my room. I have a separate person coming. We've been talking for the last it's been almost 2 hours just chatting about different ways that we learn languages. And I want to introduce you guys to, his name is Dan. He has his own YouTube channel. And I will link his channel in the description below. So why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello, hi. Thanks, Bianca, for having me. Yeah, it was great talking to you for the last. I can't believe it was 2 hours.
Yeah, you can check out that video on his channel. I will also link that video in the description below. So please check it out. It's great.
Yeah, excited to release that. A little bit about myself. I'm from Canada. I grew up speaking a bit of Cantonese with my parents, and I went to school. I studied medicine, became a doctor, worked a bit, and then decided I wanted to study Mandarin. I failed a couple of times while in Canada, but I thought, if I really want to do this, so I thought, maybe I should move to Taiwan where they speak Mandarin. And so that's what I did. Ended up, originally was planning to go for 4 to 6 months and really immerse myself, but ended up meeting a lot of really cool people, met my partner here. And so it's been over 2 years now and I'm still here.
Wow.
So we'll see.
That's
We'll
wild.
see. Yeah.
Yeah. I actually checked out a lot of your videos in the beginning. So the funny thing is, we're kind of at similar stages in our YouTube careers. I don't know if we can call that careers at this point, but I was able to check out your podcast video, and I'm a very big podcast lover. So I was just like, oh my gosh, comment immediately, like yes, yes. So we've just been like commenting back on each other's videos, and actually, Dan recommended doing a collaboration and just talking about the different ways that we learn languages and some of our own experiences today. So very excited for this conversation, and please stick around because we'll actually be talking about something very interesting that isn't very well talked about in the language learning community, and that predominantly stems from our experiences in childhood growing up learning languages. So both of us came from bilingual backgrounds. I grew up in a Romanian speaking household. If you've seen my Duolingo video,
Yeah,
you will know. That was so embarrassing, but it's okay. But yeah, how do you think that growing up in a bilingual background actually is helping you with learning Chinese, or is it actually like preventing, or I guess confusing you with your Chinese? Because Cantonese and Mandarin are not necessarily the most similar, but they do have roots from the same types of languages. So is it confusing? Do you have struggles with that, or is that not an issue for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something that I've constantly, even now, even to this day, I'm like kind of having to deal with. One thing I always tell people, like you said, is Cantonese is there are some similarities to Mandarin. For example, there are similarities in the grammar structure, and then certain words there are similarities because they both are based in the same character system. However, Cantonese, a lot of Cantonese is very colloquial, and so even the written characters are a lot of times they don't even use the written characters. So for example, if you watch any Hong Kong movies or Cantonese movies, they'll speak a certain way, and then the subtitles are Mandarin subtitles, and so they don't correlate one to one. And so because most people when they study in school, even in Hong Kong, they'll study more Mandarin, the written Mandarin Chinese, and so it's because it's more, I guess it's more formal and it's more universal. But the colloquial language is there is a written form for it, but it's mostly used maybe on online forums, and yeah, so it's really colloquial. And so with that being said, I mean, it's I mean, I spoke a little bit of Cantonese with my parents, and I say a little bit because their Cantonese was not even their first language, and so they learned it
Oh.
growing up. But they spoke Cantonese to each other because
Mm-hmm.
it was, I guess, their common language. It was their
Mm-hmm.
mutual language, and so
Mm.
um, and so when they spoke to me in Cantonese, I was inheriting, a bit of a broken Cantonese. I mean, not broken, but I
Mm-hmm.
mean they spoke it fairly well. They were able to communicate, but they were definitely not native speakers, and so
Mm.
um, when I learned it, that got truncated even more because
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, growing up as a Asian American, as parents, or sorry, uh, children of immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a dynamic there where you try to want to fit into
Yeah.
American society, Canadian society, and so
Mm-hmm.
there was a part of me where I was like, I didn't want to speak as much, and so at home I would speak a little bit, but
Mm-hmm.
there was definitely, as weird as it sounds, there was a bit
Mm.
of a language barrier, and
Yeah.
so um, all that is to say that my Cantonese wasn't that great. um, like I knew a little bit of the basic
Mm-hmm.
stuff, like like just talking to them about
Mm-hmm.
what's for dinner tonight, or I don't know,
Yeah.
like we never had like any like real deep conversations.
Mm.
But anyway, so in terms of how that helps with my Mandarin, I would say probably helped a bit in terms of the sentence structure and the grammar, because a lot of
Mm.
times there are similarities, but a lot of times there are differences. So there were parts of confusion. So I would say a lot of the differences are actually in the beginner and basic parts of learning the
Okay.
language. So once I get into more advanced levels or intermediate and advanced words, there's actually
Mm-hmm.
a lot of similarities. So for example, like I don't know, like the word intelligence, like or like smart. Let's say like smart,
Mm.
like 聪明.
Yeah.
It sounds exactly the same in Cantonese, or very similar. It's
Okay.
聪明. Yeah, so it's very
So your
similar.
Taiwanese pronunciation is just like blowing my mind.
Wait, how do you say it?
聪明.
Oh, 聪明. Okay, yeah. Okay. It's like really emphasized, the tones.
Yeah.
Um yeah, so anyways, the Cantonese is very similar, but then
Mm-hmm.
in with certain like words, like beginner, like very basic words, they're
Yeah.
like completely different. And so when I was learning as a beginner, that was tough. I would say
Mm.
a lot of those words were completely different. Like I can't think of one off the top of my head. Like for example, like oh, I can't. Like for example, I'm looking at a chair right now. Like chair
Uh-huh.
is 椅子, right? In
Yeah.
Mandarin.
Yeah.
In Cantonese we say 当, which is like
Oh. Okay.
there is a word for that in Mandarin. I think it's like 当,
Mm-hmm.
but it's like it refers to a different type of, I think it's like a long stool or something. But anyways, there's like a
Oh.
lot of like differences, like
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I can't remember any off the top of my head right now, but
That's okay.
anyways, but yeah, there were a lot of differences there, and so um, it helped me a little bit in terms of the grammar, and I think the biggest thing it helped me with was giving me a little bit of confidence that
Mm.
thinking that I've already sort of acquired Cantonese growing up, so it
Yeah.
gave me confidence thinking that if I can do this, then why can't I acquire Mandarin? Why can't I learn
Mm.
Mandarin? And so I think it gave me that sort of that extra confidence, that extra
Mm-hmm.
boost of motivation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing going along with the assistance in the grammar, do you think that Cantonese tones help or hinder your ability to learn Mandarin tones? Because aren't there
Yeah.
like nine tones in Cantonese?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's like 7 to 9, depending
Seven to
on
nine.
who you ask or what
Mm-hmm.
it's referring to. I'm not sure, but it's weird because like when I grew up speaking Cantonese, I obviously was not aware of that because I was just
Yeah.
I didn't learn it formally. I was just listening to my parents and
Yeah.
hearing what they said, and so I developed those tones naturally,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think it probably did help me because I was able to, since Cantonese is a tonal language, it probably helped
Mm-hmm.
train my brain or ears to better recognize those different tones.
Yeah.
And I do attribute my relative ease of, maybe not ease, but like better better ability to pick up Mandarin tones for due to learning or being able to speak a bit of Cantonese. I think it did help a little bit.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Because it's just like tones is something that is very difficult for me to pick up because my previous languages are all Romance languages. We don't have tones. We have emphasis and stresses, and we're very expressive in the ways that we enunciate things. You probably notice that in the way that I speak. I go like but with tones, it's very regimented but also fluid at the same time. So do you think that it's actually easier for you to pick up tones because of your previous experience with Cantonese and now Mandarin, as compared to someone who has no tonal, I guess, understanding in their native language? And is it easier for you, like, do you confuse tones regularly, or because you already like learned this concept of tonality with Cantonese, when you learn a word and you learn a turn, it sticks? Because for me, I have to like drill that in, like, oh no, this is 1 4 etc., and like repeat it multiple times, and I still confuse it. It's an active effort for me to put in the tones there.
I'm the same way. I feel like because I learned it, I'm learning it as an adult.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not learning it like I did learn Cantonese. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
I have to learn it actively, and so I'm the same
Okay.
way where I have to put a tone to every word that I learn, and so once I do that, it does become a lot easier. Like for example, the two tones that trip me up the most, and I
Mm-hmm.
think everyone has their own struggles. Like everyone has their own like things that are maybe tones that they're good at and tones
Mm-hmm.
that they're relatively weak at. The two that trip me up are 1 and 4. I always get them confused.
Oh,
And
interesting.
my teacher tells me all the time, like whenever I say one, like tone one, I always
Mm-hmm.
it sounds like I'm saying tone 4, and then
Oh.
sometimes when I'm doing a tone 4, like I'm not doing it enough, and so it sounds like a tone
Mm-hmm.
1. So those are the two that still trip me up, and I have to
Mm.
remember, like, is this a tone 1 or is this a tone 4?
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, I think Cantonese definitely helped me. I think it helped me with learning to maybe pronounce the tone, or learning
Mm-hmm.
to make the sounds that you know of the tones. But in terms of remembering them, I still have to rely on the pinyin, the tone
Yeah.
marks. Um, it's tough. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. What are your particular struggles that you find with the
The third
tones?
tone.
The third tone, okay.
Third tone sucks because it's like all in your throat, and Romance languages are all in your palate. So it's
Right.
like a very different concept for me, which is I've actually noticed that as I'm learning Mandarin, my pitch in my regular speaking voice has shifted to accommodate this third tone. So now I speak more in my throat as opposed to my palate. I have a lower tone in my voice. So, like, looking back on videos, just like with friends and stuff from like 2 or 3 years ago, I had a very higher pitch where I would always speak in my palate. I would be more expressive in this way. It would be like a little bit more like mosquito like and more annoying. But now I've shifted it to be in a more tone, a kind of like raspier type of thing, so that I can learn how to actually use my throat. Because it's just like
Interesting.
when I'm trying to go to like 4 1, like the only difference is it's just very much, it's like a grumbly sound, and I just still can't figure that out. So my only way that I can do it is just like go in your throat, go in your throat.
Interesting. Wow. So right now this is your new voice.
This is my new voice. Yeah,
Okay.
it's much lower.
Never would have thought. I mean, it's still relatively high for
It's
me.
yeah, I have a very very high pitch. Yeah, and the interesting thing is, so I also sing, and I'm a very very soprano, only soprano. But as I've learned Mandarin, my positioning and how I sing actually changed. Where now I'm able to utilize both my throat as well as my palate at the same time, because some pronunciations require that, especially like the chi sound with a third tone, or like a xue. It's in the root of your mouth, but you also need to bring it down to be in your throat too. So I've learned how to utilize those positionings at the same time. And now my voice when I sing has shifted too, which is very weird. I did not anticipate that.
Interesting. Wow, you've really analyzed this. I kind of just, I don't really focus on what's happening in here. I probably should more. Yeah, there are some really trippy, difficult, pronunciations with Mandarin. The one I struggle with a lot is, well, there's a couple. One is like the H sounds. I'm trying to get better at that.
Yeah.
And then I can't think off the top of my head right now, but there's a couple of odd pairings that make certain words, like pairings of characters that make certain words difficult. Like for example, oh man, I'm gonna butcher this. Like, do you know the word like luxurious? Like
No,
Wait.
I don't think I learned that one yet.
Man, I'm butchering it. Anyways, like it's like I think it's SHECHI. There's like two H's,
Okay.
and so
Yeah.
anyways, it's tricky. That's
Oh,
struggle.
yeah. Mine is like 40, 14. You know that tongue twister?
Oh
It's
yeah,
like
I saw your
40, 40. Like that transition from a 40, it's like very just the sh or ch transitioning to a non-aspirated version is just really hard. But also the qu sound. The reason why I know so much about the placements for that is because I sucked at saying that for so long. I was just like trying to figure out how do I pronounce this because it does not sound right. And then so then my partner was like, "Hey, this is how you pronounce it. It's utilizing this area." And then I had to like try different positionings until it sounded more normal.
right. Yeah, I think it's what trips us up is the anglicization of the
Yeah,
pinyin.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's because it doesn't sound like
Mm-hmm.
that if you base it on like English words. That's not what it sounds
Exactly.
like. You kind of have to listen
Yeah.
to it. Also on
Mm-hmm.
the third tone, I also when I first started, that kind of tripped me up too. I don't know if you've um, heard about this, but I watched a video about the third tone that really helped me, where they were saying like basically like in a lot of beginner videos, they'll teach you
Mm-hmm.
how to say the proper third tone, but
Oh, it's like,
yeah, and it goes
like
back
you
up.
go down.
Yeah. And then there was a
Worse.
video from a native speaker saying that, most people don't say that. They don't pronounce it
Yeah.
like that. They only pronounce like the first part of it. And that like
Yeah.
blew my mind. I was like, what am
Mm,
I doing? Why am I like saying it perfectly every time? I should just do what
yeah.
native speakers do. Yeah, so that helps a lot.
Yeah. Like an example is like when you first learn, the first thing you learn is like ni hao. So it's like ni hao. No one says that. Just like ni hao. Like it's
Yeah,
just lower. That's it. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, that blew my mind.
Yeah. There's a lot of weird pronunciation. Actually, that's an interesting thing because like beginner language learning content tends to be like simplify things in such a way where it ends up being more confusing for
Right,
learners. Do
right.
you find that with like just beginner content in general?
I do, especially with the pronunciation stuff. Like for
Mm-hmm.
example, I'm listening to a lot of native podcasts right now, and what I'm
Mm-hmm.
finding is, well, initially when I started listening, it was very difficult for me because obviously they spoke really quickly, and
Yeah.
then they would slur a lot of words. Like even now, I'm
Yeah.
noticing like they're slurring, like um, like for example, like this podcast I'm listening to.
Mm-hmm.
Every time he says how xiang,
Yeah.
he'll say like for example, it's like he'll say like
Yeah.
好像 like he just slurs everything and it goes so quickly. Or
Mm-hmm.
like always like there's like a common one like 不知道, like I don't know, and then they'll
Yeah.
just say like 不知道, like it was just say so quickly.
Yeah.
And then you're just that's a pattern too that I think you
Mm-hmm.
need to train yourself to
Yeah.
recognize. And so
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think there's definitely, I think it's good to learn the proper pronunciation just so you know
Mm-hmm.
it, but then
Yeah.
probably not to maybe dwell too much in that. Like if,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know, it's tough.
Yeah. I think one thing that could also be very challenging for learners is something that I will have to reach when I get to that point because I'm not emphasizing speaking right now. But like, how would you recommend going about transitioning from a more proper teaching type of pronunciation into these more like fluent pronunciations that account for tone slurs and for like just I think it's called like agglutination or amalgamation of things. You just combine things, like an example is in English, when we say like, you got to go somewhere, we don't say you got to go somewhere. You're like, you gotta. So
Right,
got,
right.
got and to are combined together. And for native speakers, we know that. But if you're not a native speaker, you're like, wait, is gotta a new word? I've never heard this before.
Right. I think it's so similar in Mandarin. There's a lot of words where they kind of combine it. They
Mm.
I don't know the word, but I think I don't know how did I do it. I think I'm kind of a weird case where I mentioned this in the our other talk, like on my channel, where I was
Mm-hmm.
listening to a lot of podcasts when I first came here to Taiwan because
Yeah.
I wanted to really immerse myself. Initially, I listened to a lot of the radio, but then I never really found like anything that I enjoyed listening to.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't really find like a host that I really liked. But then
Yeah.
once I discovered podcasts, I just started listening to them more and more. And at first, I didn't understand much at all, but I would pick out like certain words here and there that I'd learned, like, I don't know, just basic words. Like
Mm-hmm.
even if it was just like jeli or nali,
Yeah.
like this, that, like I would pick up like certain words. And it was, I think what it was doing was it was slowly training me to recognize the sounds of the language, the different intonations, the tones, like
Mm-hmm.
when a sentence started, when it ended. Like I
Yeah.
needed to understand that because while I was listening to that, I was also thinking, like you asked me previously about Cantonese. I think this is where Cantonese kind of helped me, was that
Mm-hmm.
I knew that when I was listening to Cantonese, like I knew sort of where sentences started and ended, and
Mm-hmm.
so I was like, you know, I have to get to that point with Mandarin, and so I was like, so I just kept listening, and eventually I picked up more and more words. I would look up pleco. Like initially,
Yeah.
a lot of what I was doing was listening to podcasts and then using the Google speech to text function. So I was basically like hearing a
Oh.
word because I didn't know how to, like I didn't know the pinyin necessarily. And
Yeah.
so I would hear it and then I would try to say it on my phone and search it on
Mm-hmm.
Pleco by speaking it.
Yeah.
And then I would look up the word and a lot of times I would find it, and that's how I initially started like searching words and gaining more vocabulary was through that. And then the
Mm-hmm.
beautiful thing about podcasts is you can listen to it over and over again, and also
Yeah.
usually the hosts will say they have a you know a range of vocabulary, and so they usually use the
Yeah.
same words over and over again, especially if it's within the same podcast. They'll usually be talking about something specific, and so
Mm-hmm.
you get that great repetition, that spaced
Yeah.
repetition. And so I think that's how I was able to slowly transition. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it's I kind of threw myself into the deep end, but you know, I kind of do weird stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy that.
Yeah. So then do you actively practice these like shortenings and these slurrings of words? Do you recommend for learners to also practice that or to try to remain as faithful to the proper pronunciation as possible while they're speaking it, even if they're getting exposed to the more natural form of spoken speech?
I think that's a great question. I think for me, what I would recommend is just speaking it as normally as you can, as properly as you
Mm-hmm.
can, and then I think that slurring process is going to happen naturally, anyways. Like I
Mm-hmm.
think if you speak enough and if you hear enough native speakers, it's going to feel eventually it's going to feel natural to you to the point where you may slur a little bit. You're probably
Okay.
not gonna slur as much as they do, but I think it's gonna be a natural, slow process.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if you're interacting with native speakers
Yeah.
regularly. I think it's just gonna rub off of you. Like I feel like, for example, if I move to England or I don't know, like Australia, I may pick up like a slight change in my accents. I think a lot of people
Yeah.
do that. It's like I think people, yeah, we're just gonna slowly acclimate to other
Mm.
people. Like we slowly mimic them.
Yeah. So, one other thing that you really like doing, and you have a lot of really great videos about this, actually, a newer video that I really enjoyed was you going through your process of using like language exchange to help develop your spoken Mandarin. And one question I have is, do you have speaking anxiety? Because I do. Like when you speak to someone, is it frightening or scary to actually talk to someone who's a native speaker?
I'm scared talking right now. No, I totally have speaking anxiety. Like it's so weird. Like for example, like I'll be able to say something
Mm-hmm.
like when I'm by myself, I'll be able to say something in Chinese like perfectly, and then when I'm
Mm-hmm.
speaking to someone, it's like I don't know. I can't. It's like I can't pronounce the word. It's like I don't know. There's that extra layer of anxiety. There's that extra layer of
Yeah.
like I don't know, that pressure, and then like
Mm-hmm.
I just mumble it out, and then I'm like, what the heck did I just say?
Yeah.
It sounds so weird, and then it comes down. Sometimes it takes me like a couple times
Mm-hmm.
to really I don't know. I think it's maybe muscle memory. Maybe you just
Yeah.
have to say it enough in public, say it enough in a high pressure situation. But
Mm-hmm.
I definitely experienced that. I don't know what are your experiences?
So I just have anxiety in general.
Okay.
So that definitely it helps with that. But I think one thing that I've actually been thinking about more recently is um, I also have speaking anxiety when I speak my Romanian, which is kind of weird because it technically was my first language. Although I'm definitely not as eloquent in Romanian as in my English. But like, I kind of feel this pressure to be able to speak perfectly because that's my heritage. That's kind of where I grew up from.
Right.
And since I can't speak it to the level that I would like to, it kind of gives me this anxiety of like, I just shouldn't speak because I'll sound like an American. And that's kind of transitioned into my Mandarin as well, where it's like, well, if I don't speak perfectly, then I just probably shouldn't speak at all because I just need to get better first and then I'll speak later. And it prevents me from like when I'm in my safe space, like speaking to my friends where they won't judge me, or speaking to my partner and he won't judge me. Like I can make any mistakes that I need to because it's not a high stress environment. I shouldn't have that same level of anxiety, but I'm still like, oh no, I kind of suck, so I shouldn't do that. Do you experience that in any regard or?
I totally experienced this. Actually, this is so funny because I just filmed a video about this that I haven't posted yet that I'm
Oh,
gonna post.
nice.
But I can talk about this. It's so interesting
Mm-hmm.
because you mentioned what's his name, Matt versus Japan in the other
Mm-hmm.
video, and he
Mm-hmm.
did a really great video with Stephen Krashen. I don't know if you've
Mm-hmm.
watched that podcast.
I probably did.
Okay. It was yeah, it was really interesting because there was one part where he asked him about, sounding like a native speaker,
Mm-hmm.
and Stephen Krashen was like, he doesn't know because he hasn't done these studies, but he had
Mm-hmm.
some anecdotal experience that
Mm-hmm.
really, sort of informed him on the idea that a lot of it is really about what he calls like he calls it club membership, and it's basically like
Oh yeah, I
being
remember that. Okay.
yeah, do you remember that? Where
Yeah.
he was talking about whether you see yourself as part of this club, like
Mm-hmm.
of native speakers.
Yeah.
And I think he told the story of this student who was learning French, and he was like he hated French or something, and then
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the year there was like this exam where he had to it was an oral exam, and he wanted to like show up the teachers, and so he
Mm-hmm.
like exaggerated his French accent. He wore like a beret, and then
Yeah.
at the end like the teachers were like, whoa, where did this come from? Like this is amazing, like 100%. And then
Mm-hmm.
his whole idea was like, we we have it in us to really speak like like very very similar to native speakers, but
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times we don't feel like we should. We feel like
Yeah.
we kind of put ourselves into this like group of maybe like a Chinese learner
Mm-hmm.
or not a native speaker, and so we sort of
Yeah.
like it's like a filter. It's like a success filter or a success barrier. I don't know. Like
Mm-hmm.
so it's interesting. Like I definitely feel that too. Where when I speak with my language exchanges or my Chinese teachers, like a lot of times it's almost like unconscious where I'm speaking. I'm trying to play into that role of being a student, so I'm
Mm-hmm.
not speaking as well as maybe I could I could, or maybe I won't use like very maybe more advanced words that maybe I've learned recently, because I don't want to appear like, I'm like a know-it-all or a smart ass. Like I want to play into the role of a student. And I think it's the same way when I speak with friends who are also learning the language. Like I have a good friend Tom who's also learning the language, and when I speak with him, I'm a lot more comfortable speaking Mandarin Chinese, whereas if I'm speaking to another native speaker. So I think a lot of it is psychological. A lot of it is, just believing that at a certain point, like it's tough, because like I think you have to go through that beginner stage and embracing it to say that, I can make mistakes. And then another part is, once you get into that upper intermediate, into that advanced stage, and you want to really start speaking like a native speaker, I think you actually have to believe like you're part of that club. And I'm talking a lot, but there is one good trick that I do a lot, that I actually just made a video about to help me sort of ease my anxieties when I'm speaking. It's I don't know if you've watched it, but it's basically whenever I speak, especially when I got here initially, when I was a beginner, I would just say, I'm sorry, my Chinese is not that good. Like, 不好意思，我的中文不太好. And that just like relieves like a lot of like it just released a lot of weight off me on sounding perfect.
Yeah.
And that's something that I did a lot and recommend.
Yeah, there's also the song by these three white guys in Taiwan. 对不起，我的中文不好。对不起，我不知道你说什么。
Really? I haven't seen that.
Really? It went viral. It's like 50 million views or something like that. It's like it's really funny. Yeah.
Are you serious? Okay.
Yeah, look it up.
Okay,
It's just, I forget. Just type in 对不起，我的中文不好, then you'll find it.
Are you? Oh my god! Okay, I should have used that to like as a cover of my video.
Oh my gosh! That. Yeah, get that SEO tag optimization.
Okay.
But you can always change it later, But I think one thing that you mentioned was about joining the culture of like the fluent speakers, like being a part of that. Question that I have that I can't answer, like if we're trying to portray this fluent speaker, if we're trying to like be a part of their culture in some way, like the example that you gave with Stephen Krashen's student, like he kind of made the most stereotypical French person that he could think of, and it eventually emulated a person who was fluent in French. So let's say I would try to do that with Chinese. I am not a Chinese person. I am a white person. At what point does it go too far? And is that something that we should actually be considering as language learners, as well as I'm trying to improve my pronunciation and trying to be more aware of like cultural expectations or even just values of the system, because it does relate to the language in and of itself. Like what should someone like me be doing to try to be a part of that culture of fluency but not go too far?
Yeah, it's I think it is a bit of a fine line. It's hard to say. I agree with you. It's hard to say where that line is. I mean, but I think as learners, as students, I think we have a bit of freedom to sort of push that boundary, just because we're learning it, and a lot of us are doing it with good intentions. We want to learn about the culture, and so I think it's reasonable for us to, and I think it's reasonable, but it's the most effective way, as we've spoken about. The most effective way to, or one of the most effective ways, is to to acquire a language through mimicking, through imitating. That's a lot of what babies do to learn a language, and so I think personally for me, that's one of my favorite ways to learn, is like whenever I listen to a podcast, whenever I'm watching a YouTube video, I'm sort of shadowing, I'm sort of trying my best to mimic how they sound. And so whenever I speak, I'm sometimes thinking about that type of sound as sort of like I'm using that as like a role model. And I think that's really I don't know. I think that's really important. I think that's really effective. I think if we're if we're imitating and if we're mimicking as much as possible, I think that's probably it's one of the best ways that I know to really sound as native as possible.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't know how that might take it too far. I mean, it's not something that I've really thought about. I don't.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, I think you don't want to embarrass yourself. Like I think sometimes, like for example, in Taiwan, um, if I, it's this is interesting. So like if I sound too like um, sort of like standard uh, mainland Chinese,
Mm-hmm.
like if my accent sounds too standard
Yeah.
mainland Chinese, like people are gonna look at me weird. And so I
Mm.
think a lot of it is really context based. And so
Yeah.
everywhere there's gonna be clubs like right here in Taiwan. There's a Taiwan club, and so I have to my
Mm-hmm.
accent has to fit the Taiwan accent. And
Yeah.
so even though I'm listening to standard mainland
Mm-hmm.
podcasts at times, and so for me, it's always going to be in the back of my mind. I think like I'm gonna
Mm-hmm.
like for example, if I move to mainland China, I'm sure I'm gonna be able to alter my accent a
Yeah.
little bit, and so I think a lot of it is mimicking, and a lot of it is
Mm-hmm.
sort of fitting into the environment you're in.
Yeah, funny thing is, so when my partner visited Taiwan, I also have a lot of Taiwanese friends. He went there, and then all of the people there, they're just like, "You sound like such a mainlander. What are you doing here? Why do you have such a mainland accent?" And then just even hearing the differences between so my boyfriend is from mainland China, his family's from Shanghai and Wuhan, and so he has a very like northern accent. It's not like the Beijing where it's just like R's everywhere, but
Right.
it's still pretty like north. There's a compression of the tone, so that makes it harder for me to understand. But when I compare it to my other friends who are Taiwanese, like one of my best friends is Taiwanese, and she has like the cutest accent ever. It's just so emotive and so emphasized, and I'm just like, wow, it's like night and day between these two different accents.
Yeah, it's so different. It's like I remember when I first started learning, I think I was a little bit more interested in going to Taiwan and learning the Taiwan
Mm-hmm.
accent, just because I found it a little bit easier at first to understand. Just because
Mm-hmm.
the standard accent sounded so daunting to me. Now, like I'm able to understand it a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, like the especially the Beijing like accent,
Yeah,
like it's very like the R's, and like it can be very confusing, and the
very
slurring.
confusing.
Yeah, so um, right now my goal is to sort of be able to understand all of the accents, like as like not all the accents, but like the main standard Chinese accent and the
Mm-hmm.
Taiwanese accent both. So I'm trying my best to split my input into to have
Yeah.
both of those influences.
Yeah, interesting thing. Maybe it's because you're a little bit further on in your studies, but I'm just like trying to stay away from any Taiwanese things, which is hard because Taiwanese media is so good. But like I'm really just trying to emphasize on my standard mainland pronunciation. Do you find that it gets confusing between swapping between the resources of the different accents, or have you solidified enough of your Taiwanese accent and acquired enough of it where it no longer confuses you?
Um, I would say yeah, it no longer confuses me,
Okay.
but sometimes there are. But I'm still learning, obviously. So when I listen to, I would say I've been exposed to more Taiwanese content, especially initially, and now I'm starting
Mm-hmm.
to, for a while now, I've been starting to listen to more mainland China stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
so I'm still learning a lot about the mainland Chinese dialect and some of the word differences, and
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of the accent differences. There's a lot of those, so that doesn't trip me up as much. But some of the differences in word choice, those are some of the differences that I still struggle with, and
Yeah.
it's always interesting to find differences like that.
Mm-hmm.
But mm, yeah, I don't. It's a fun challenge.
Hmm. Yeah. And following up on that, I don't think I asked you this earlier, but why did you actually decide to learn Mandarin? Start off with Cantonese. What's the driving force behind that? And also leaving your previous life. You have a couple of videos talking about how, yeah, you quit being a doctor and just went to Taiwan to learn Chinese. So what started that? That must have required a lot of motivation and drive and like gumption to be able to just drop everything and leave.
Right. It sounds a lot, yeah, a lot more, you know, flashy than maybe it was at the time for me. Just because I say that because I'd been thinking about it a long time. So I'd been thinking
Okay.
about learning Mandarin. I think I've been thinking about moving to the country of my target language, whether it
Mm-hmm.
was Taiwan or China, like mainland China. Those were the two main countries I was considering. And
Mm-hmm.
um, so yeah, so at that time, you know, why I wanted to learn it was, you know, I'd always spoken a bit of Cantonese with my parents, and so I wanted to really improve my Cantonese. And actually, my
Mm-hmm.
initial thought was to move to Hong Kong to study
Mm-hmm.
Cantonese.
Yeah.
And but at that time in 2019, it was during the riots, and so
Yeah.
it was pretty hectic there. So so at that time, I was just like, you know, maybe I can learn Mandarin and it would transfer a little bit to
Mm-hmm.
Cantonese, and I could learn both.
Okay.
Because at the back of my mind, I was still interested in learning Mandarin too, because I thought
Mm-hmm.
there were some similarities, and it was I found it a very beautiful language. Like whenever I heard
Mm-hmm.
it, whenever I had gone back to mainland China to visit some family there, it always sounded like, although I didn't understand it, it always sounded
Mm-hmm.
like, I don't know, it sounded like a very pretty language, and so I wanted to learn
Mm.
it. And so and then on top of that, I'd traveled a bunch backpacking in my
Oh,
mid
that's
20s.
cool.
Yeah, and so that really informed why I wanted to
Mm-hmm.
learn languages. Like every time I would travel, I would just meet all these travelers who spoke, especially
Mm.
Europeans who spoke like multiple languages, like I don't know, like
Yeah.
Spanish
I
and like
I
French, and like
feel
and I
all
was
of my
always,
family members know like five languages, and I'm just like, I am so dumb in comparison.
yeah, like I was like, I met a friend who, yeah, he spoke like five, six languages, and I was like just in awe. And he was switching between them wherever
Mm-hmm.
we would travel a little bit together, and whenever we met other travelers from different countries, he would speak in a different language, and I was like sitting beside him, like, what the heck, like this, I need to learn a language. But then, you know, I always have so much motivation whenever I'm
Mm-hmm.
traveling, but then whenever I go back home, and like the motivation dies. So
Yeah.
so that's why I was like learning Mandarin at home in Canada for a while, and
Mm-hmm.
giving up and sort of
Mm.
losing motivation. And so I knew that with me, with my personality, I wanted to really push myself and immerse myself
Mm-hmm.
in the country. And so that's why I moved to Taiwan. And so um, that was the Chinese learning side of the Chinese learning side part of it. And then as for medicine, it was always it was always sort of just a job for me, and
Mm.
it
Yeah.
was a very fulfilling job. Like I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
really enjoyed doing it, but I knew that I had other interests, so I wanted to, for example,
Yeah.
travel and pursue learning Mandarin in Taiwan, and so that was important to
Mm-hmm.
me. So I mean, yeah, I saved up some money, I paid off my loans, and then quit my job, and then came to
Yeah,
Taiwan.
that's
I mean,
pretty impressive.
yeah, I mean, like I said, it was there was a lot of planning that went into it. So
Yeah.
it wasn't sort of like a, you know, you know, this sucks, like I hate it. It wasn't sort of like a just spur of a moment kind of decision. Like I had thought
Mm-hmm.
about it, so I was a little bit more comfortable with the decision, because
Mm.
it wasn't just an immediate rash decision.
Yeah, that's interesting because for me, I am very passionate about many things, and that kind of impedes my ability to focus at times. But it seems like you were able to just like decide, yeah, this is something that I want to prioritize at this stage in my life and just do whatever it took to get that goal complete. Do you think that that's like an accurate statement?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I was studying a lot for my 20s. Like I was basically in school, post-secondary school for all of my
Yeah.
20s, which looking
Mm-hmm.
back, I'm like, man, that's a lot of schooling. So in the back of my mind, I was also like, I need to get out there. I need to travel more because I'd done a bit of
Hmm.
traveling whenever there were any breaks, like summer breaks and winter breaks, things like that. But it was always so
Hmm.
short, and I always
Yeah.
had in the back of my mind that I wanted to do what I call like slow travel, where I wanted to like live in a
Mm.
place
Yeah.
and really immerse myself in the culture, like meet the people and learn the language that way. It was just such a romantic idea for me, and so I wanted to I wanted to really like try it out. And so it was just, yeah, it was perfect opportunity. Like I'd graduated, worked a bit, paid off my
Hmm.
loans. I had, no no immediate attachments that I need to worry about. So I was like, this
Yeah.
is like a great chance where I'm probably not going to have a chance like this in the
Hmm.
future as easily. So I might as well take it.
Yeah. So then that was your motivation to start learning Mandarin. What would you say is keeping you learning it and keeps you learning through the frustrations and struggles of language learning?
Yeah, that's I ask myself that all the time. Like I've been recently asking myself why don't I pick up another language, or why don't I learn Cantonese now,
Oh no.
or learn like French. Um, I don't
French is
know.
hard, man. French is hard.
Yeah. Wait, have you learned French?
Uh, I dabbled in it a little bit, and pronunciation is a pain. You don't pronounce
Right.
anything.
Right. Yeah, it's I've just been thinking about that, and so what keeps me motivated, I think as I'm getting more into the more advanced stuff, I'm really interested in reading more like native books. I'm interested in
Mhm.
consuming more native media, like native podcasts, watching native
Yeah.
movies, and I think that's what's really motivating me. Um, and then and then obviously I have this channel that you know uh, where I've met some really cool people. And for example, I've started a podcast with one of my good
Mm.
friends, Tom, where we practice our can't or sorry we practice our Mandarin, and actually that's been a really cool motivation for me to continue to hone my skills, continue to
Mm.
practice learning Mandarin. It's just been a fun way to keep up with it. So every week we do an episode, and we have something new to talk about, and it's just,
Mm.
I don't know, it's a fun way to motivate myself. But obviously, like my motivation dips at times. Like it's not
Yeah.
always high. Like there's always times where it dips, and I need to take some time off or take a break.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I don't know how you do your regimen. Your your regimen sounds intense. Like I really applaud that.
Yeah, my viewers know I'm kind of intense. You don't have to be like me. No one has to be like me. I'm just whack like that.
Okay.
But
But what do you do? What
yeah.
do you do when or do you not lose motivation, or what happens
Oh
when
no,
you
I
don't?
lose motivation a lot. Yeah, because it's like you can kind of fake yourself into thinking that, oh yeah, I'm motivated, I do it, and then you set time to study, but then you're not actually in the study. You're just kind of going through the motions and just trying to check it off your list. But that's kind of a sign of like, oh well, I'm not really into it today. But for me, if I'm in that type of funk where I really am not motivated to keep studying, I actually change my resources. Clearly, something is not going right with the study materials that I'm using now. Maybe I'm just tired by it. Maybe I'm overwhelmed by it, or I just don't feel like it's useful anymore. I swap over to something that actually will keep me engaged. So, an example is like I'm going through HSK5 right now, which is the textbook series that I'm using. And I was like really good in the beginning, like studying like every single day with it and like had a schedule and everything. But then after like chapter 4, I'm just like, this is kind of annoying. This is kind of frustrating. And it's just like, I'm learning about things that are relevant in the future, but not right now. And I just realized like, I can't keep doing this. So like, I paused on my HSK5 learning, and then I swapped over to watching movies. Just watching something that I'm very interested in, that I actually care about the characters, care about the story, and just started studying that. So it's harder because I don't have that graded material anymore that will help me to not read something above my level. So ultimately help my comprehensibility. But the more important thing is like, if you're not motivated to do something, if you can't get yourself to utilize the resources that you have, you're not going to learn. So even if what you're studying is not the most efficient way according to like the 10 step or whatever process that someone told you on the internet to follow, like do things that will actually keep you studying, do things that you actually enjoy using, you know. So that's what I've been doing, just swapping things out if I no longer find enjoyment using it anymore.
I totally agree. I have like multiple resources where I'm constantly swapping in and out. If I ever get bored of one, I'm switching to the
Mm-hmm.
other. And there's different mediums that you can try. So
Yeah.
that's the beautiful thing about self study.
Yeah, I spent way too much money on books. Like I just have all of my like stacks like right here. Like this
Whoa,
is just all of my graded reader content
that's awesome.
here
Are
and
those the Mandarin companion stuff?
yeah, these ones are really good. I love these guys actually. So I got pretty much every book that they have for Breakthrough in Level 1. I read through all of them. It was really nice. I got this guide in the beginning. This is just a dictionary. It's useless.
Okay. Okay.
That was like in the beginning with like you need to buy all the resources, you need to get everything or else you're never going to learn. But it's like I never look at it. And then this is what keeps me going. I
Oh,
want to
Harry
get to the
Potter.
point, yeah, where I could read Harry Potter. So like
Oh,
I just have
nice.
this sitting here because I can look at it and be like, I will get there someday.
Have you tried?
So I've tried. I did. I tried the first page. Apparently the first chapter is terrible just in general because they have to explain all like the different
Right,
like
right.
magical systems, so it's easier after the first chapter. But I started reading it. First of all, this book is beautiful.
Wow.
But I started reading it and it's so hard. It is so bad. I can't. Like, I had to look up every other word pretty much just to get through a sentence. So I was like, this is way too difficult for me right now. I can't do this.
When you read, do you do you ever like use that pleco function where you take a picture and then you have the screen reader? Have you ever tried that?
I try not to because I kind of like writing it out by hand
Okay.
on their like handwrite feature, even though it's not as efficient. It helps me to when focus on the word, and I try to kind of guess what the word means based on the components of it.
Right.
Because so like if there's a word that has like the two dots and then the line underneath, the one that resembles water, it's like something that's fluid, you know, like
Mm,
communication has that component in it where it's like a flow of ideas, a flow of thought into it, or just a flow of water. So I try to recall different components and what they could probably mean towards a word. And that just gives me the time to do that while I actually write it out, and it helps me to remember what the word actually means if I write it out, because that's like another added like tactical practice type of thing
right.
for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. I kind of switch in and out of like for example,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm getting lazy and I want to read something really quickly, like, and if it's really advanced, then sometimes
Mm-hmm.
I will take a picture and just screen read. But I agree. Sometimes it is a it's kind of a crutch because you rely
Mm-hmm.
on it. And I
Yeah.
do oftentimes I do try to read and try to just guess what it is if I don't understand, just
Mm-hmm.
based on the on the like the busho. I forget how do you say that in English.
Yeah. I don't know. But honestly, though, like one thing that I have been noticing is like when I'm trying to understand a very complicated sentence that maybe the grammar is like completely different from English, and like you need some more like cultural nuance to understand what it's actually saying. You can't just go based on the literal translation. You need the figurative translation. You know, like when you're thinking about the idiom like kill two birds with one stone, the literal translation is very macabre, very gruesome, and how are you supposed to know what that means unless you know what the figurative translation
Right.
means? Yeah, so there's a lot of things like that with Mandarin as well, and I found that it's really hard to actually understand what those figurative translations are unless you have like someone who already speaks the language and can help you out with that. Do you find that as well? And how do
Mm.
you go about like figuring out those definitions of not as common, or it's just not what you would expect for the definition to be.
Right. So just clarifying, are you asking about more of like the maybe practical context of, like, for example, if you look up a word and it says something in the dictionary, but then you use it and it's like your friends are looking at you weird and you're like, that's not where we say
Or
that.
even or even like you look up a sentence, right? Or you're trying to figure out what a sentence means. You look up the individual words, but then when you put it together, it doesn't make sense. Like,
Oh,
so
yeah.
how would you go about figuring out the definition to that?
Yeah, that's kind of tricky. I think it was a lot trickier in the beginning. I think now I can kind of guess it out based on the words, just because usually, like, if it doesn't make sense, I'll look at the other words in the sentence. And but there are really tricky, like, grammar points with, like, certain words that are, like, for example, like what's one, like, for example, like, the way or way, like, there's like two tones to it, like that one kind of trips me up sometimes, like I remember when I first heard like, do you know the grammar or the phrase, like, yi something wei zhu, like, it's
I
like,
don't think I learned that one yet.
oh, okay, sorry. So anyways, there's that one, there's way, and then there's a bunch of other weird grammar, like, for example, yi, like, that that can be used in so many different ways. I think the ones that trip me up are the ones that have multiple uses, and then I'm kind of figuring, like, does it mean this or does it mean that? And sometimes I do have to ask a native speaker. But sometimes I think I find, like, as I'm reading more and more, as I'm listening to more and more, it's becoming more natural to sort of just intuit it. But I think initially I remember there was a point where I was like, this is so confusing. I don't understand this. Like, I think it was just a hump that I had to get over.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely feel that. Like, now I can kind of tell when something is supposed to go by its figurative translation as opposed to its literal translation. I don't know if I'm at the point yet to guess what that figurative translation is for certain things. What I actually am doing now is, like, trying to guesstimate, okay, it's probably saying this, and confirming with a native speaker,
Right.
which has been fairly helpful for me.
Right. And a lot of times, sometimes it's when you read it as part of a text in or a phrase in a book, or when you listen to it, a lot of times they don't say it. For example, if they're referring to an idiom, they may not say it completely, like, perfectly in that context. They may add a word inside of it, or they may it may be disjointed a little bit. And so I think part of it is also recognizing where that addition is, and then you can input that, or you can search it in Pleco and still find that idiom. That's something that I'm still learning to do. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I think for our final set of questions, I just wanted to ask you more about your YouTube channel. So you have a great YouTube channel. What got you started? Why?
Okay.
Why did you start posting videos?
Right. Wait, before I talk about this, I don't think you talked about how Romanian affected your language learning. I'd be curious.
Oh, whoops. I thought I did, but I guess not.
I'd be curious. Yeah, I'd be curious. I think the audience would be curious too. Like,
Okay,
I think
totally.
only I talked about Cantonese. Yeah.
I was just very, very interested in your life.
Okay.
I forgot to talk about my own.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is a raw and uncut thing. So, audience, you guys will see exactly what goes into making these types of collabs. um, but yeah, I think so. My experience is that I have a pretty easy time learning Romance languages because Romanian is a Romance language. So conjugations are easy for me. Like gendered things are easy for me. I can like understand things fairly well with Spanish, with Latin. Like I can figure things out. I used to be able to speak at a high level in Spanish too in high school. Haven't practiced in a while, so I can't do that anymore. But I could still pick it up if I put practice into it. Um, but the hardest thing for me is like trying to translate the things that I've learned in my Romance language environment or in my English language environment, that frame of reference that I had into something completely different. So I find myself trying to express ideas that I can express in English or in Romanian in Mandarin, and you can't. There's just no concept of this. Like because the value systems are different, because things that are spoken about regularly are could be different because they're in two separate parts of the world, the way that the languages have evolved, it prevents you from saying certain things. Or if you say it, you technically can say it, but it's not a commonly spoken thing. So an example is like my go-to phrase when I like talk to my friends or talk to my roommates is like, hey, how was your day? And it's a very casual type of thing. When I first started learning, I asked my best friend who's Taiwanese. I'm like, how do you say this? Because I want to say this to you at practice. And she's like, we don't really say that. Like when I come home, my mom just asked me if I ate, and that's it. You know, like we don't say like, how was your day? If you want to ask about that, it's more like, how are you doing right now? Like, tell me how your life is going in a more like deep, intimate type of thing. I don't know if you've experienced that, but that's just what I've been told. So,
Right.
like, how can I translate these concepts that I'm so used to talking about and speaking about because of my Romanian or because of my English to a language that doesn't necessarily have those same types of expressions or those same types of concepts being shared?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
Yeah.
totally agree. It's never like a direct one-to-one translation. There's always like
Yeah.
nuance to that, and that's what makes it so tricky. But that's also what makes it so interesting to learn.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you think that Romanian helped you in learning Chinese, or learning while you're learning Chinese?
So I think knowing another language will help you pick up another language. Because one, like I have the vocalizations for two languages right now, Romanian and English, which helps me to pick up another vocalization more easily. So my pronunciation will probably be better than someone who only knows one language, is monolingual, just because I have more flexibility in the way that my mouth can move, in the way that I can aspirate or unaspirate certain things. It'll still take a while because Mandarin is so different from Romanian or English, but I can still produce language more easily than someone who doesn't know a second language. And on the other side, because I have experience like switching my brain to be Romanian brain and English brain, like it's easier for me to also learn how to switch that for Mandarin. So like when I speak with my parents, like I can just immediately swap over to Romanian, or if we do like half Romanian, half English, I don't need to wait and like process. It just immediately happens. If I'm like with friends who only speak English or then who speak Romanian, like I can go do English first and then immediately go to Romanian. And that will definitely help out when I do that process of transitioning to Mandarin once I get fluent enough. So like I have more tools required to learn a language. That doesn't mean it's not possible for monolingual speakers, but like there will be things that they have to get used to, that someone who's bilingual will just naturally have acquired just by the nature of having to shift frames of reference, shift like ways that they learn, because different languages require different things, and being able to produce in situational ways.
Hmm. Wow, interesting. Yeah, I agree. I think that having a second language definitely helps, especially with that switching.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
awesome. I think you asked about my YouTube channel.
Yeah.
um,
I'm
I,
curious about that.
yeah, as in terms of why I started, I think initially. So actually, initially, I've since like privated a lot of videos. Initially, I actually started vlogging in Chinese as a way to practice like, you know, my
Uh-huh.
pronunciation. And
Yeah.
so like I was like basically making short clips like every day,
Mm-hmm.
speaking about like a certain topic or like a certain idiom, and I was just like riffing
Mm.
on it, or maybe I'd written something in advance, and it was a great way for me to just like practice speaking when I didn't have the
Mm-hmm.
chance to speak to someone. And
Yeah.
then slowly that kind of transitioned to me like sharing um, videos in English, like sharing my experience, and then
Mm-hmm.
and then I started making um, other videos, like more collaborative videos, and then I made
Yeah.
some funnier videos, and so it's kind of a mishmash of
Mm-hmm.
random videos, but mostly centering around learning Chinese and
Mm.
sharing my experience learning Chinese in Taiwan,
Yeah.
and how I use immersion to acquire the language. And so
Mm-hmm.
just interested in the language and just wanted to share. Yeah. It's
Nice.
called
Yeah.
Danyo, Danyo.
Yes. Link will be in just the description. But yeah, do you have any plans on learning any other languages, or are you just going to stick with Mandarin for right now?
Right now, I think it's mainly going to be Mandarin, and then I do want to improve my Cantonese.
Mm-hmm.
And then I do have a similar romantic like dream of moving to maybe France or
Mm-hmm.
Spain or something and learning one of
Mm.
the Romance languages. I don't know. We'll see.
Get ready for conjugations upon conjugations and irregularities and all that other stuff.
Oh God. Okay, I'm
Yeah.
gonna call to you for help.
The
You've
funny
learned
thing is,
Spanish, right?
I have learned Spanish, but like my grammar, because I know Romanian, I still don't know the grammar. Like if you ask me like what is this? What is the breakdown conjugation table of this? I wouldn't know because that's not how I learned Romanian. I would know that more so for Spanish because I learned in a more traditional setting, but just like with my English, unless I'm thinking really, really hard, I won't be able to like spat out like grammar rules or anything like that.
Oh God. So it's a lot of like do they have like also the gender
Yes,
roles and like
yes,
the okay.
yes.
God, I hate that in
Yeah.
I hated that in French.
It's yeah, it's more like so it's every single item has a gender to it to differentiate it between similar sounding items. But like the
Oh,
gender doesn't always make sense. Like why is a house feminine versus like a car or etc. Yeah.
right. Yeah. That's tough. Oh well, I'm looking forward to
Yeah.
it.
It's fun though because you can express yourself in very floral ways. That's kind of how I like to express it. Like we like to explain things very precisely, but also utilizing like really interesting descriptions of things. Like actually a book that I'm reading, like she describes a house with facial features and it's like, oh, this house that I grew up in reminded me of this person. Like the eyes were like windows that peers into your soul. The facing was red, like someone who's blushing after they just had like their heart was fluttering over something, you know. So like we actually kind of talk like that in
Wow,
a more poetic type of way, which is really beautiful. So I really do enjoy that.
that is so interesting. So, do you think that probably helps with, you know, their ability to create art and maybe make more creative?
I don't
No.
know about that. All I know is
Okay.
we talk too much.
Okay. Okay. That's
that's,
interesting.
that's actually been something that's really hard for me in Mandarin because Mandarin is very like cut and dry, you know, like very simple, very efficient. However, they're still able to convey very complex and profound ideas in simplicity. That's kind of the vibe that I've gotten so far in my
Right.
learning. So even when I'm like communicating with my partner, like he's very um he shortens things to like the most essential words and I'm just like going on and on and on. It's like wow, very different communication styles.
Right. Um, I will say that as I'm listening to more native material, there is a lot of
Mm-hmm.
like in addition to the cut and dry, there is a lot of they use a lot of like idioms and old sayings
Yeah,
to help them to
yeah.
express like really complicated topics and
Mm-hmm.
just sort of a in a nutshell. And I guess
Yeah.
we do that in English too, but I feel like they have a lot of very historically related
Mm-hmm.
phrases where like a lot of times you have to have known, maybe you don't have to know
Yeah.
the total historical context, but a lot of it, like
Mm-hmm.
when I look at in Pleco, like it comes from like a lot of, there's like there's like this is like from some general who said it, or it's from like some famous
Mm-hmm.
book. Like there's like, I think a lot of that comes from maybe books that they've read in school earlier on as a
Yeah.
child, or yeah, so that's interesting. They have a lot of those sayings.
Yeah, definitely. You can even see that in variety shows, which I was very surprised about. Like everyone kind of just knows.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully one day I'll get there.
Hopefully. Yeah, but thank you so much for coming on my channel. I will like leave all of your information in the description. So everyone please go check out Dan Yo and his channel. If you have any other words that you want to say, feel free to share them right now. Any shout outs or anything else.
No, thanks for having me. This has been great. I've been learned a lot. Really interesting to see, hear about someone else's learning style. It's always great to hear that, and then you can kind of it informs my learning, and I think I mentioned this in my other video where I'm gonna probably go back to Canada soon at some point, and so it's good to hear from someone who's not studying in the country of their target language, and so I
Yeah.
think I have to pick up some of your 8-hour routines.
I don't know about that. It's kind of hard, but yeah. But if you guys are interested, check out Daniel's channel for the other video that we made talking about how I learn. And you guys may know many stuff about how I learn, but Dan asks a lot of really good questions that go beyond the scope of my other videos. So please check that out. It's great. But yeah, thank you so much for joining. I hope you have a great rest of your night. And for everyone who's watching, have a good evening. And I will see you guys next time. Bye
All right,
bye.
thanks. Bye.